The night was painfully cold, the kind of winter night where the wind cut through skin like a blade. Snow piled up along the sidewalks and the streetlights flickered as if they too were tired. Inside the small neighborhood store, the clock above the counter ticked loudly toward closing time. Just as the manager reached for the lights, the door suddenly flew open. A tired single mother rushed inside, pulling her small son close to her chest. Her breath came out in white clouds and her thin jacket did little to protect her from the freezing air. Her hands trembled, not just from the cold but from exhaustion. Her clothes were old and worn, the fabric faded from years of washing and reuse. The little boy buried his face into her shoulder. His body felt light, too light, and every few seconds he coughed weakly. She rubbed his back, whispering soft words meant to comfort him, even though fear filled her own heart. "Please, please don't close the store," she said, her voice barely louder than the wind outside. Her eyes met the manager's, full of desperation. "My son needs one more blanket, he's been sick from the cold." The manager let out a long, irritated sigh. He glanced at the clock and then at the door, clearly wanting to go home. "We're closed," he said flatly. "You should have come earlier." The woman lowered her head in shame. She reached into her purse and searched through it slowly, hoping something more might appear. A few coins rested in her palm, hardly enough for a blanket. Her lips trembled as she held them out. "This is all I have right now," she whispered. "I'll pay the rest later, I promise." The manager didn't even look at the coins. Near the shelves stood a quiet man dressed in simple clothes. He looked like any other customer, no suit, no signs of wealth. He had been silently observing the scene, pretending to read labels while listening to every word. No one in the store knew that he was actually the CEO of the entire company, visiting his stores undercover to understand how customers were treated. His eyes shifted from the manager to the shivering child. The boy's face was pale, his fingers red from the cold. The man felt a heavy ache in his chest. Something about the scene felt painfully familiar. As the manager stepped toward the door to lock it, the quiet man straightened, his calm expression hiding a storm of emotion. This night was far from over. The undercover CEO stood quietly near the shelves, his presence barely noticed by anyone else in the store. He did not interrupt. He did not speak. Instead, he watched carefully, painfully, taking in every detail of the moment unfolding before him. The little boy began coughing again, a dry, fragile sound that echoed through the nearly empty store. His lips had turned pale, almost bluish, and his small fingers clutched weakly at his mother's jacket. She pulled him closer, rubbing his arms as if she could somehow push warmth back into his fragile body through sheer will. The CEO's gaze lingered on the child. He noticed how the boy's shoes were too thin for winter, how the soles were worn down, and how his pants were slightly too short, leaving his ankles exposed to the cold. No child should look like this, he thought. The mother slowly opened her purse, her hands shaking as she searched inside. The purse itself was old, its corners cracked and peeling. After a moment, a few coins slipped from her fingers and landed softly on the counter. The sound felt louder than it should have been. "This is all I have," she said quietly. Her voice broke as she swallowed back tears. "I'll pay later, I promise. I'm just waiting for my paycheck." Her eyes glistened as she looked at the manager, not demanding, only begging. The manager barely reacted. He glanced at the coins, then shook his head firmly. "Rules are rules," he said coldly. "We're closing, I can't make exceptions." The words hung in the air like ice. The CEO felt something tighten in his chest, a sharp, unexpected pain. The scene had pulled him back decades in an instant. Memories flooded his mind, memories he rarely allowed himself to revisit. He remembered being a small boy in a drafty apartment, wrapping himself in thin sheets that did nothing to stop the cold. He remembered nights when the heater didn't work and mornings when his breath fogged the air inside his own room. He remembered his mother counting coins at the kitchen table, her face tense with worry, hoping it would be enough. He had promised himself long ago that if he ever had power, no child would have to feel that kind of cold again. The CEO clenched his fists slowly, forcing himself to stay calm. This was exactly why he had come undercover, to see the truth, not the polished reports. And the truth was standing right in front of him, shivering and afraid. As the manager moved closer to the door, keys jingling in his hand, the CEO took a quiet step forward. The silent witness was about to become something more. Just as the manager reached for the lock and turned the key, a calm but firm voice cut through the tension. "Give her the blanket." The manager froze. Slowly, he turned around, clearly irritated at being interrupted. His eyes landed on the quiet man who had been standing near the shelves all this time. Until now, he had looked like an ordinary customer, nothing special, nothing important. "I said we're closed," the manager snapped. "You need to leave." The man didn't raise his voice, he didn't argue. Instead, he took a step forward, his expression steady and unreadable. "Give her the blanket," he repeated. Then, after a brief pause, he added, "and add food, medicine, and a heater." The store fell completely silent. The mother's eyes widened in shock. For a moment, she wondered if she had misunderstood. Her son lifted his head weakly, confusion mixing with hope as he watched the strange man. The manager laughed nervously. "Sir, you can't just give things away," he said. "That's not how this store works." The quiet man reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather wallet. From it, he removed an identification card and held it up under the bright store lights. "I'm the CEO of this company," he said simply. The color drained from the manager's face. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The keys slipped from his hand and clattered onto the floor. In that single moment, his authority vanished. The mother stood frozen, her body stiff with disbelief. She stared at the ID, then at the man's face as if trying to understand what was happening. Her legs felt weak, and she tightened her grip on her son to steady herself. The CEO nodded toward the blanket shelf. "Please," he said gently, "get her the warmest one." The manager rushed to obey. He grabbed a thick, soft blanket and placed it into the mother's arms. The moment her son felt it, he wrapped himself inside, clutching it tightly as if it were a lifeline. A small, tired smile appeared on his face for the first time that night. Tears streamed down the mother's cheeks. She tried to speak, but no words came, only quiet sobs of relief and gratitude. She bowed her head slightly, overwhelmed. "This shouldn't have required begging," the CEO said softly. "No child should suffer because of rules without compassion." As the manager returned with bags of food, medicine, and a portable heater. The next morning, the store opened earlier than usual. Employees whispered among themselves, sensing that something was different. By noon, the news spread through the staff like a quiet storm. The store manager had been fired. An official notice was posted near the entrance, signed directly by the company's CEO. It announced new policies that would take effect immediately across every branch. No child would ever be turned away in the cold again. In emergency situations, basic warmth, food, and medical assistance would be provided without question. Compassion, the notice stated, was no longer optional, it was the standard. Employees read the words in silence, some with shame, others with relief. Across town, the single mother sat beside her son in a small clinic. For the first time in weeks, the room was warm. A doctor checked the boy's lungs and smiled reassuringly. "He'll be fine," the doctor said. "You brought him just in time." The mother covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes, not from fear this time, but from gratitude. The healthcare was fully covered just as the CEO had promised. She watched as her son slept peacefully under a thick blanket, his breathing finally steady. That afternoon, her phone rang. It was the store. She had been offered a job, steady hours, fair pay, and benefits. When she heard the words, her knees nearly gave out. She thanked the caller again and again, her voice shaking as hope finally replaced desperation. A week later, she returned to the store not as a desperate customer, but as an employee. She wore a clean uniform, her head held higher. The same shelves that once felt cold and unwelcoming now felt like the beginning of a new chapter. Sometimes she caught sight of the CEO's reflection in the store window during his follow-up visit. He didn't seek attention or praise. He simply nodded, satisfied that the change was real. That night, the mother tucked her son into bed in their small but warm apartment. A heater hummed softly in the corner. The boy hugged his blanket and smiled up at her. "Mom," he whispered, "are we going to be okay now?" She brushed his hair back gently and smiled through happy tears. "Yes," she said, "we are." Sometimes, one small act of kindness doesn't just warm a cold night. It changes a life forever. Red.